Georgia Tech will open up their season on the road at Florida State in Tallahassee. And with the call, the voice of the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets making his debut on the program, Andy Demetra joins us. Andy, first of all, welcome. And I know, like everybody else, you just got to be thrilled with the fact that, guess what? We're finally getting to week one of the ACC football season.
Yeah, you know, the three classic words at Georgia Tech is tone weast leather, and it's going to finally sink in, Wes, as you know, when we can finally say that at 3:30 on Saturday. So very excited, not only for us, but for the student-athletes as well. They've handled this really well since March, and they certainly deserve the reward of having a game.
Andy, we talked about process and protocol a ton on this show since June. But when it comes to Georgia Tech, we're talking a lot about quarterback. So what's the latest on who will take the snap outside of the four guys? Are there any emerging 11th hour candidates we need to know about who potentially could be quarterback on Saturday at 3:30?
Yeah, that's the burning question, Wes, and I think it'll remain a burning question until 3:30 on Saturday. And you know, we saw last year in the Clemson game that Jeff Collins, he's not afraid to play multiple QBs. He doesn't feel obliged to name a QB1 for the sake of naming a QB1, and having been to numerous practices over the last month, the four QBs in the conversation, Jeff Sims and Tucker Gleason, the early enrollee freshman, the redshirt freshman Jordan Yates, the redshirt sophomore James Graham, they've all taken turns looking good. Now, I don't claim to watch practice with the same nuance that Jeff Collins and Dave Patino do, but you're seeing a quarterback's room that collectively can make a greater variety of throws. And so would it shock me if we see multiple QBs take snaps at Doak on Saturday? No. Which QB may start the game may not be the one that ultimately finishes it or takes the majority of snaps throughout the year. And we've seen, again, historically, Jeff Collins does not mind going with multiple QBs. And, you know, like I said, if he follows that same trajectory on Saturday, that it wouldn't surprise me.
Andy, last year, given year one for Jeff Collins, and it was such a change across the board, the way the game was going to be played, new staff, everything else. It was also such an inexperienced team. So almost everything was working against Georgia Tech last year, getting this thing in terms of building a foundation. Now I'm sure when you go through the depth chart, and I know there's no real depth chart, it's above the line and all that stuff, but you probably look down the names and go, man, I know all these guys. I know it's going to be kind of crazy because they were so young last year, and you just knew, hey, there are going to be some rocky roads and some tough bounces all over the place. But those kids got a chance to see what it's all about. And again, I know Collins was on here the other day talking about we're bigger, stronger, faster, more experienced than ever before. But that really is true when you start talking about the 20 version of the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets.
Yeah, absolutely. You got the most returning starters in the ACC. I think 23 of their 27 touchdowns last year were by freshmen and sophomores. And amid all the uncertainties and unknowns of this college football season, I think having returning experience and returning production, it's going to matter more this year. So yeah, you look at the preseason predictions for Georgia Tech, but keep this in mind. 19 starters are back, 96% of their rushing yards, 93% of their tackles, 15 of the 16 takeaways Georgia Tech forced last year, the guys responsible for forcing them are back. So they have returning production. And as you continue this upward ascent in the ACC, and as Jeff Collins continues to reshape the roster in his own image, having so many familiar faces back, especially at the beginning of the year, I think it's going to go a long way for the Jackets.
But, Andy, he's also still leaning on young guys. I mean, you mentioned Sims and Gleason at quarterback. I mean, there's Gibbs, the running back, right? I mean, he's still thinking about having young guys contribute to his second team.
Yeah, and let's add Amarian Brown in there, who tied Calvin Johnson's true freshman touchdown record last year. He's a sophomore. At the skill positions on offense, they're still very young. It's hard to think of Jordan Mason is the elder statesman, but he's only a redshirt junior. Defensively is where you see more of the upperclassmen, more of the veterans, especially in that back four with guys like Wanya Thomas and Tariq Carpenter, Trey Swilling, and Zamari Walden. But offensively, you're right, at the skill positions, they're very young still, but that should also excite Georgia Tech fans knowing this group is going to continue to gel and become more cohesive. The guys who are making impact plays this year are the guys we'll be seeing making impact plays in multiple seasons to come. And that's what I think makes me excited about this upcoming season, is just watching the maturation of these skill guys and knowing that their best games and best years are still ahead of them.
Andy, it's also an interesting opener, isn't it? Because, I mean, here's Florida State, really a team that you don't see that often, which doesn't seem to make any sense given the proximity of the two schools from Tallahassee to Atlanta. But when they've played, they've had some unbelievable games. And one that immediately I know comes to your mind, but it's kind of cool to see Georgia Tech and Florida State playing.
Yeah, Miracle on Techwood was the last time they played. They have some history in Charlotte, and the last time Georgia Tech went to Tallahassee was 2009. Wes, I know you were there for that when they won the shootout 49-44. There was a game in Tallahassee in 1999 where Georgia Tech played. In fact, it's going to be, 21 years from Friday. Florida State was number one in the nation, but Joe Hamilton set a school record for highest completion percentage, 22 of 25. So you're right, they should be playing more often, more frequently than they have, at least recently. You're right about that, Mark. But when they have gotten together, it's always been eventful. So that's certainly something to look forward to and see if the stars align on that again come Saturday.
By the way, that 99 game, Pack, that's where Joe Hamilton's Heisman Trophy campaign started to ascend, because Ralph Friedgen, who was the offensive coordinator for George O'Leary, real quick, lined up in a wishbone and checked to 5 wide on an audible by Hamilton, and Mickey Andrews fired off the bench to the numbers to call timeout. They lined up in a wishbone, checked to 5 wide. Mickey Andrews comes out there, timeout, timeout, timeout. And then on the play after that, they ran like a slide option to Des White, who went for a touchdown. It was just bananas. It was arena football on grass, Andy, is what essentially transpired that night in Tallahassee. Yeah. Let's talk about Antonius Clayton, the transfer from Florida, who did not get the waiver a year ago. When the NCAA was handing out waivers, he did not get one. So he's had to wait, and he comes at a spot for Jeff Collins and for Coach Thacker, the defensive coordinator, that I got to believe he could make an immediate impact Saturday for Georgia Tech.
I think so. There was a time last year, Wes, where I think the two best pass rushers in the Georgia Tech campus were Antonius Clayton and Marco Coleman. And Marco's been retired for a few years. Antonius is a guy who, if you look at where he was ranked out of high school in Vienna, Georgia, he was the number 27 player nationally. That makes him, at least by high school rankings, the highest ranked player who will suit up at Georgia Tech since Calvin Johnson. And pass rush consistency has been an issue for Georgia Tech predating Jeff Collins' arrival. They haven't finished higher than 108th nationally in sacks per game in the last 6 seasons. And that's been a missing piece and a very frustratingly elusive one for Georgia Tech. Antonius Clayton is a guy, 6'2", every bit of 270, who's got great bend, who can fire off the edge and be that menacing pass rush presence that Georgia Tech fans have been starved to see. He has been just in a holding pen for the last 18 months. That season he had to sit out last year, it counted against his eligibility clock, so this is going to be his lone season in the white and gold. But there had been buzz around Antonius Clayton since fall practice last year, and I'm really excited to see what he can do, what kind of mayhem, to borrow a Jeff Collins line, he can wreak on that Georgia Tech defense.
Andy, I mentioned to Wes earlier today, I think Georgia Tech as a football team will be much better than they were a year ago. However, as far as wins and losses go, it may not be a telling sign, because this schedule is brutal. Again, when you start talking about the +1 for everybody in the league, there's no doubt Georgia Tech's playing the most difficult non-conference game with UCF, which will be a very entertaining game. But even within the ACC schedule, when that got retweaked, there were no favors as far as Georgia Tech is concerned. They're going to see everybody and their brother.
Yeah, it was an arduous schedule, Mark, even before the ACC configured it. Not only UCF, which begins the year ranked, but you got Clemson, You got Notre Dame. And the ACC Coastal is getting better and better. They still got to go through that Pittsburgh defense, which is going to be no fun. But that's where I go back to them returning 19 starters and so much production. 96% of their rushing, 93% of their tackles, 87% of their receiving yards. And we'll see how much that can lead to consistency week to week. And I think that was an issue for Georgia Tech. If you looked at the back half of the season, they'd go from having a really rough day versus Virginia Tech to getting a season high in yards of offense versus North Carolina State. To have more consistency week to week is going to be a key piece for Georgia Tech. And if they can accomplish that, I think you'll see the wins start to come, the competitiveness to start to show up on a more week-to-week basis. You're right, it's going to be tough, and Jeff Collins has made no secret of that. But as he said, even dating back to their winter conditioning, we might have the toughest schedule in the nation, but we want the toughest team in the nation to counteract that, and he certainly believes in that.
All right, Andy, we talked about Clayton defensively. Who's an offensive guy we need to keep an eye on? Maybe we're not talking about. I mean, you mentioned Amarian Brown, who was dynamite. We've talked about the four-headed candidate pool at quarterback, J.P. Mason at running back, who we're not keeping an eye on. I know Tyler Davis was a one-year tight end who had an outstanding season. Have they been able to slide somebody in there they feel like they can count on too?
Well, Dylan Devaney was the understudy to Tyler Davis last year, had 6 receptions as a freshman, 6'6", 258. He and Dylan Leonard. Apparently, we only recruit tight ends who are named Tyler or Dylan if you looked at our roster last year. Those two guys, I think, will grab the majority of the snaps at tight end. I'll tell you a guy, West, that might be slept on, and he's a veteran, but only played 4 games last year before the season-ending injury. That's Jalen Camp. He's a big-bodied, physical wide receiver, and I think from a physical standpoint, Georgia Tech was lacking that type of specimen in the receiving corps as they went through the season. You're talking a guy who is chiseled from granite, 6'3", 220, who can run, make physical catches, high-point passes, and really attack the football when it's coming its way. Georgia Tech's receiving corps will be deeper this year. There will be more weapons, but Jalen Camp, a guy that maybe ACC fans at large have forgotten about, but a redshirt senior, a great leader within the program, and I think he gives them a different type of receiving target that will be well served for them this year.
Andy, we had Jalen on the show, and he was terrific.
Favorite.
Yeah, he was really good. Of course, all the student athletes are always pretty good on this channel. By the way, we've had a couple play-by-play voices today, and we're going to ask you the same question. For Georgia Tech to pull off the win Saturday, what has to happen?
They need to do whatever they can to keep that Florida State defensive line at bay. And we've talked about the offensive line, that they're continuing to get bigger, longer, stronger. But they got to give some protection for whoever is at quarterback for them. Open some holes for Jordan Mason and Jahmyr Gibbs and Jemias Griffin, because I think that backfield can be a workhorse for Georgia Tech. You got to force some turnovers. You got to get off the field on third down. Georgia Tech, though, has shown the ability, even last year, to win and be competitive on the road. They won in overtime versus Miami. They hung 28 in November on Virginia and lost that game narrowly. So I don't think they're going to go into Doak Campbell necessarily quivering at being on the road for the first time. But I think you got to get off the field on third down. You got to stay ahead of schedule as best you can on offense, and you got to give some protection so that whomever they play at quarterback can get comfortable, get into a rhythm. And I think if Georgia Tech can accomplish that, it's going to be really exciting, really interesting on Saturday.
All right. Andy Demetra is the voice of Georgia Tech. Thank you, my man. Safe travels. We'll see you soon.
Appreciate it. And Mark, I love the Emmy, but I love that Georgia Tech helmet behind you even more.
And that, by the way, that one's signed by Coach. That was a hand-delivered here to the basement. He said, I'm going to sign this one. So that one's signed by Coach Collins. That's the real deal back there, along with our Emmy, of course.
I'll just settle for a West Durham autographed helmet at this point.
Me too.
Stop.
On a check.
Stop. By the way, by the way, I don't know if that was the helmet. We got the helmet between Collins' second or third or fourth wardrobe change when he visited the basement back in January. But man went through clothes like Diana Ross in concert. There it is. You got it turned up. There it is. Got it signed, the whole bit. Jeff Collins.
Signed on both sides, just in case anybody was wondering. The real deal.
Just
looks good. We'll look even better on Saturday.
That's it. The 404.
And at
Live
Coach
and well.
Collins, Andy. Yeah, at Coach Collins. So